Hi everyone, welcome back to the channel and welcome back to another Hannibal reaction video. Today I'm going to be watching, reviewing, and reacting to Season 3, Episode 9 of Hannibal. Alright, so Episode 8, we started kind of a new turn, a new direction storyline-wise for Hannibal. Of course, after the insane ride that was Episode 7. We had an Episode 8 that took us down a very different track. It jumped 3 years into the future, after Hannibal had turned himself in to Jack for his own reasons, having to do with Will, and Will always knowing where he was and not giving in to Will's kind of basically breakup of him. So 3 years into the future, 3 years have gone by, Hannibal has gone on trial, he has of course been found guilty of his crimes, but also has been found legally insane, partially thanks to some blatant lies and manipulations by Chilton and also Alana. Merlin, come on Merlin. We've got a kitten scratching. Chilton obviously doing it for his own reasons because he wrote a book and he wanted this influence and money. Alana for much more curious about that. But so Hannibal has been in the institution for the criminal insane all this time. Meanwhile, Will has gone off and is trying to forget, move away from Hannibal, from profiling, from the FBI, from everything that was a part of that life, and he has gone and gotten married to a single mother with a son, and he's basically just living the family life out there with all his dogs and out in the woods. And I did want to mention something I didn't say at the conclusion of the last episode. It was interesting to me that they have them set up in the woods in kind of like a wintry sort of environment here, whereas in the books and the other film storyline, they're down in like a tropical, in like a Floridian type, I think it actually is just in Florida, and living like on the beach, and a totally different kind of vibe. And I'm curious if they just did this woods thing because of how they've turned the character they've made Will be on this show. He seems more like a go into the woods in the cold and hide out kind of guy, as opposed to going and hiding out on boats kind of guy. You know, it just seems like that's what they've made him into. So, and also, you know, the theme with the antlers, you know. But anyway, so I just wanted to briefly touch about that. But so Will is off doing that. And then, meanwhile, we have the introduction of Francis Dollarhide and the start of the Red Dragon storyline. So we have this serial killer who's out there killing families. Jack goes out to try and bring Will back into the fold, to try and get his help, to try and prevent more families from being killed. Will gets guilted into doing it. You feel this sense of, no, because you know exactly what's going to happen. And then, indeed, at the end of the episode, Will says, I have to go see Hannibal so I can fully get into this mindset. And he does, and we're left off with them meeting again, just briefly at the very end. So that's where we are going into episode 9, and I'm excited to keep going. Excited to see how they continue to play out Red Dragon, and also what's going to happen to poor Will now that he's kind of back in Hannibal's orbit. So let's get into the episode 9 of Season 3. Hannibal.
I smell dogs.
It makes me want to feel bad for you, but you're Hannibal.
That shaving lotion.
Of course you smell dogs, it's Will.
It's something a child would select, isn't it? Is there a child in your life? No. I gave you a child, if you recall.
2, and then you took them both away.
I came about Chicago and Buffalo.
Yeah.
You've read about it. I've read the papers. I can't get them. They won't let me have scissors, of course.
Of course.
You want to know how he's choosing them? Thought you would have some ideas. He just came here to look at me. Get out.
So crazy. See how, like, she's so relieved. Because he was basically like, no, I'm going to make everyone think you're dead. And then we're going to start a new life together. Us and then Will.
Are you ready to die, Abigail?
Yes. Can I push the button?
Yes.
The fucked up part thing is that he really seems to be enjoying himself in these interactions. He always really genuinely did seem to like her. But then, of course, he always did seem to genuinely like Alana, too, and he had no problem fucking her over either, so... So nuts.
Abigail Hobbs is dead.
Long may that real Hobbs.
He needs a family to escape what's inside him.
Yeah, but he needs to kill a family. Oh!
We know a fair amount about how these families died. How they lived is how he chooses them. How is he choosing them? How did you choose yours? Ready-made wife and child to serve your needs? A stepson, daughter. The stepson absolves you of any biological blame. You know better than to read. Can't pass on those terrible traits you fear the most. You've come to wag your finger?
I love a good finger wagging.
Yes, you do. How is Margot?
Hannibal!
Dogs are turning, Hannibal.
Oh my god.
I can hear them clicking. I don't know what you're planning with Will Gray. You're planning something.
It's always planning something.
You've already cracked the lid. Can't resist peeling it back.
Will came to me.
Yes, he did.
I advised him against it.
I'm sure.
You suggesting I don't have Will's best interest in my mind?
I'm stating it as fact.
Exactly.
You've got Will dressed up in moral dignity pants. Nothing is his fault.
I've been courteous. And you've been receptive to courtesy. These niceties are conditions. And the conditions are non-negotiable.
I must behave myself.
I know what you're afraid of. It's not pain or solitude. It's indignity. You're a little bit like a cat that way.
That's a good
I'll take
comparison.
your books. I'll take your drawings. I'll take your toilet.
It's quite a big step up there with that last one.
I'll have nothing but indignity. The company of the dead.
She's just straight up saying, Hannibal, don't continue fucking with Will. Don't do something insane. You want to put your little jabs at him about children and whatnot, fine. But don't contribute to more people dying horribly.
We can detect each other.
Oh, here we go.
Yes.
Seriously? You really did that? Hannibal,
This is what your father is. This is all of him now.
you
What death has reduced him to.
you dug up his body? How could you?
All that's left is what is
And you talk about love.
Can you be honest with me now?
You don't understand love, Hannibal. You are not capable of actually loving.
He was as good to me as he knew how to be.
I guess your feeling toward Will is the closest you can come, but...
Hunting with him was the best time I ever had.
And this is what it comes down to with what I was saying about him with Abigail and Alana, too. It seems like he cares in some level, but it all comes down to himself.
Now, are you just keeping America clean, or is that evidence?
You're trespassing, Freddie.
He's trespassing before the blood dried. When they call you in.
I'm not talking to you.
We're co-conspirators, Will. I died for you and your cause.
You didn't die enough. You came into my hospital room while I was sleeping, flipped back the covers, and snapped a photo of my temporary colostomy bag.
Covered your junk with a black box. A big black box. You're welcome.
You called us murder husbands.
You did run off to Europe together. How does the Tooth Fairy compare with Hannibal Lecter? I haven't seen anything like this since the massacre at Muskrat Farm. Funny thing about that massacre, not only did Dr. Bloom survive, she got rich. Lecter's living the lap under her care. What kind of arrangement do you suppose they have?
Complicated arrangement.
Couldn't be more complicated than your relationship with Hannibal.
You paid him a visit. Before you lied, know that I know you did.
Goodbye, Freddie.
Federal manhunters stymied in their search for the Tooth Fairy have turned to the most savage killer in captivity for help. It takes one to catch one, a federal official told this reporter.
Takes one to catch one? You're referring to Hannibal Lecter or me?
I'll let my readers decide. If you're smart, you'd use me. All psychopaths are narcissists. They love to read about themselves.
It's true.
You're dressing younger. You're taking up some sport you enjoyed with a new partner. Tennis, maybe.
You've taken up your sport with an old partner.
I wrote Will a note, warning him you'd come calling.
Yes, I read your note before my office forwarded it to Will.
Jack.
To whet his appetite or yours.
Mm.
You placed him back in the pot.
Yes, you did.
We're all in this stew together, Doctor.
It would be more honest if you ate his brain right out of his skull.
And you're nothing if not honest.
This shy boy has already seen Will.
The two devils in Will's life.
You chumming the waters, Jack.
Jeez.
It takes one to catch one.
It takes two to catch one.
Will has never been more effective than he is with you inside his head.
I agree. But don't think you can persuade me to play along. Will appeals to my intellectual vanity.
I don't think I'll persuade you, Doctor. You'll either play or you won't.
Okay. Well, that was episode 9. Ending at a moment with Hannibal giving a little smirk of interest and entertainment to us when he's on the phone there with Dollarhide. I think it's interesting. If you look at, and you know, it was never really something I actually thought about extensively until seeing it in the context of this series. A lot of the source material, the killers in the source material here, the books, Silence of the Lambs, and Red Dragon, the killers that Hannibal helps to find, helps Will or Clarice in the different books to find, are both in the process of becoming, and that's very much part of who they are, what drives them. So that's kind of like a theme of a lot of the killers in the Thomas Hannibal works. But not so much Hannibal. He just is what he is. But how they've put it into this series in terms of his interactions with Abigail, with Will, with lots of others who we've seen that he's had playtime with over the years, even to an extent with Bedelia and Mason and Margot. He's very much obsessed with the idea of others becoming something else. And a lot of that transformation is very much focused on them becoming a kind of killer that he thinks that maybe is inside them anyway, and he's kind of trying to bring it out. But he's all very much about that and like cultivating that in others, which is interesting. Especially because, like I said, he doesn't become, he just is what he is, which is indescribable. But that's part of what his thing is. Like, he kills, he eats, but he also manipulates and drives to try and push other people to become something else. And that's just interesting in the light of the source material having that be such a big focus of the original kind of primary villains that Hannibal is working with the FBI to catch, you know, for his own reasons. But so I think that's cool how they've incorporated that into the show as just like a big, very central theme and something that's important to him. So of course, when he hears Dollarhide say at the phone there that it's what I'm becoming, of course that's gonna catch his eye, even more so than he already was caught up in this whole thing with his interest sparked. So oh, Hannibal, so interesting. And of course, he's playing with Will, as he always does. I thought it was interesting how they decided in this episode to show these Abigail flashbacks. I always was very curious as to what exactly happened in between that scene where we saw where Abigail is afraid because she finds out the truth about him and she's wondering if he's gonna kill her, and he seems to imply that he is. And then that moment where we find out that she's still alive and that he's kept her alive all this time. And so then we very much see that he brings her in as a co-conspirator with, of course, the idea that if he can get Will on board with what he wants Will to do, that she'll basically be like a gift to him, a gift of a daughter that he's prepared for them. But then, of course, when Will doesn't come on board, then she's a punishment, basically. A pain for him, which is what she ends up becoming. But it just reiterates to me again the way that he manipulates. We saw more of that with Abigail here on display. And it's just so frustrating for me when he has these conversations with her about love and the love from her father and her for her father, and can he have that love from her to him, and you know, when he's surely thinking about loving Will and his idea of love and what it is. And I get, you know, it's hard for me because I know a lot of you guys out there I've seen in comments are very much on board with the idea that Will and Hannibal have this genuine love. And I know that there is a kind of love there, but I'm very much of the opinion that Hannibal is not actually capable of actual love. Hannibal is a psychopath. Hannibal is not capable of feeling for others beyond his sense of self and his own wants and drives. And with Will, I guess it's the closest maybe that he's come, with the exception of maybe his sister. But even to that extent, the feeling that he feels, the kind of sort of love that he has, is a need to consume, is a need to possess, to own, to control, to shape them into what he wants, and then to ultimately destroy them, to literally eat them. And so again, I guess, you know, love is a complicated thing, and you could try to say that that's his version of love, that it's a kind of love, and you know, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it is, but for me, an actual love for somebody else has to be more detached from your own kind of ingrained narcissism than is possible for somebody like Hannibal. And when you look at his relationships with Alana and with Abigail, it just seems like, or Bedelia, it just seems like it seems as though he has a kind of affection for them. At the least, very least, he enjoys their company for what they can kind of provide, the dynamic that they give him. But ultimately, when it comes down to it, he's willing to just kill him in the blink of an eye if it serves his purposes, and not, you know, really feel bad about it. So ultimately, it's not like he actually loves so much as he enjoys. Like, he can enjoy you. And with Will, I just feel like it's got to be like a step up kind of extension of that same sort of thing. In a way, it's deeper because he feels like he reveals more of himself to Will, and he wants Will to become not just like a killer, not just become in the sense that all these others that he's played with or manipulated would be becoming, but he wants Will to become like an enmeshment of him and Will. So to him, the loss of that is what is so heartbreaking that he can't get over or can't get past. And ultimately, that all doesn't just come down to like love and heartbreak, but also control, domination, the idea that he can't give up on the idea of having control. And I think it's interesting to compare that to Jack too. And I think that's one thing the series has done a great job of highlighting throughout the entire course of it, is that Jack, for all his legitimately good intentions and for all that you cannot really fault him because he's trying to save lives, in the end, there's a lot of similarities between him and Hannibal in the way that they're willing to just kind of sacrifice people if they're no longer of use to them, or sacrifice people because that's how they become the most useful to them, and that they can be very manipulative in a way. And this just again is showing it. It's like, and I was kind of trying to get at this in the episode. You always have an idea of somebody having like a devil on one shoulder and an angel on one shoulder trying to pull them in two different directions. And it's like Will has two devils on his shoulders, and one has better motivations for pushing him in this direction than the other one does, certainly, but nonetheless. And I do get, and I think it's important to keep in mind, Will's complicity and his responsibility in a lot of the choices he's made and things that he's done too. And I think they pointed that out in this episode. They had Hannibal in his conversation with Alana being like, you want to basically put it all at my feet, and Will's not to blame for anything. I think Will is way less to blame than Hannibal would like to think. But of course, he does decide to go along with things. He does get suckered back into it. But it's hard for me to put full blame on him because in my view of things, in a lot of ways, Will is an abuse victim. He's been mentally tormented and fucked up and manipulated and abused. And that's one of the reasons that I can't like fully feel anything but pity for Abigail also, for a similar reason, even though she's saying she's going to go along with Hannibal's plots here to potentially kill, and she did so with her father. Will is an adult, so some more complicity there than Abigail, but again, still, I don't know. It's just hard for me. I know this is complicated. I know a lot of people out there are big fans of the idea of the Will and Hannibal kind of love dynamic, and I don't want to just brush that aside either, but I do think it's important to keep this sort of thing in mind. And I think, yeah, there we go. My camera was having a bit of an issue for a second. So the Dollarhide stuff continues to play out in interesting ways. They seem to be sticking pretty close to his storyline so far, but I'm very curious about how it's going to play out eventually. You know, in the books, Hannibal eventually sends Dollarhide after Will and his family. And I can very much see him sending him after Will's family. And maybe after Will, he's certainly sent killers after Will before, many a time. But then ultimately, you know, I don't want to just say everything that's going to happen in that storyline, but ultimately the conclusion of it is just that, you know, when Dollarhide is finally taken out, in the process of trying to go after Will's family, then Will and Molly and his stepson, they go on their way, and Will is done with the FBI and he's free of them and free of Hannibal. And I don't feel like it's going to be that simple here, because in the source material his relationship with Hannibal is much less in depth than it is on the show, and much less complex. So I'm very curious to see how they're going to change that around. It seems like with most of the other stuff with Dollarhide, they're staying very close to the source material. And that's the other thing that I'm curious about if they're going to change is Freddie. So obviously Freddie is back in the picture here. She has been in this episode. She was referenced in the last episode. And in the original source material, Freddie is pretty brutally and viciously killed by Dollarhide after Will uses her to try and draw him out. And Freddie mentioned in this episode the idea of, you know, hey, Will, you should use me. So I'm really curious if they're going to do that because it's quite the sort of grisly thing. And it was something I was wondering about from the first time we saw her in season 1, because they made the decision to change Freddie from a man to a woman. And if they were going to go with that kind of brutal scene of her, instead of him, being basically glued to a chair, like naked and psychologically tortured and then burned alive. And I don't know if they're going to do that. Are they going to do that? I'm curious. I mean, they haven't shied away with violence towards women in the show before, but I'm really curious to see if they're going to go that far. It seems like they might be because they're bringing her back in, so I'm, again, very curious to see how that's going to play out. One other thing that I just briefly wanted to touch upon that I think is good about bringing in the Dollarhide storyline, the Red Dragon storyline, is it's allows you to have an opportunity to compare someone like Dollarhide to someone like Hannibal, these different types of killers. Which, again, they've done at a small scale with the kind of like killer of the week in the first season in particular. But on a larger scale and a longer term. Because Hannibal, of course, is very, very different than a lot of serial killers. And Dollarhide in particular, it's interesting because they've talked about how Hannibal's not insane, but they've lied and said he is for various reasons. And then you have someone like Dollarhide who, he is clearly insane in a way that Hannibal is not. He has, I mean, it's clear that he has some sort of, basically a type of psychosis involved in his turn to become a killer. There's a psychosis element involved in that, in what he imagines himself to be becoming and what he's driven to do. And to the point where sometimes he feels like he's pushed into doing things he doesn't even want to do. And that's one of the reasons that I always felt the Reba storyline from the source material super interesting, because you can kind of see that this is a killer that is born out of a combination of psychosis and trauma. And when you see him interacting with a woman who he doesn't feel kind of like so afraid of or self-conscious around, and who shows him love and kindness and interest without that like kind of pity, he is very drawn to that and seems to just want that life and doesn't want to be this killer. And I have a feeling, since the way they're sticking close to source material and now we see Reba in the story, that they'll probably kind of do something similar here too, where you have a sense that this is not someone like Hannibal who would just revel in the glory of killing and playing with people and torturing and manipulating people, were it not for his own trauma and psychoses. And so if he was able to, say, receive help for those things, maybe he never would have gone down this sort of path and become who he was. And that makes him very different from Hannibal in some ways. But then on the other hand, it's like you don't want to sympathize too much, because regardless of what he's been through, lots of people have been through trauma and have psychosis and don't turn into monstrous serial killers who slaughter whole families. And the animals, that really fucking upsets me. I know. Will would understand me, guys. But anyway, I just think interesting things that are brought out of this comparison that we're able to do in the longer Red Dragon storyline between Hannibal and Dollarhide. So again, some of the things I mentioned that I'm curious to see in the future is, again, how close they continue to stick to the source material. Is it going to be changed for, you know, the Will Hannibal dynamic further? Is it going to be changed with the Freddie Lounge sort of thing and with his relationship with Reba, or are they going to stick with it? And then, of course, just curious again to see what else is going to happen with Will and Hannibal. Poor Will. I liked that they included the Abigail stuff this episode. That was cool to see too. So, all right. I think I've talked long enough, guys, so I'm going to wrap this up here. I'll just say thank you so much for joining me once again, and hopefully I will see you next time. Bye.